Hey everyone, how you doing today? Good? Last talk of the conference?
Yeah.
Last talk-ish, I guess? Yeah. So hi, I'm Chris Short. I run a newsletter called DevOps-ish. I work for Red Hat. If anyone knows what this logo is, it's not IBM yet. The acquisition didn't close. And it probably won't be IBM afterwards anyways. At least that's what we're being told. So yeah, I work for Red Hat. I run a newsletter called DevOps-ish, and I'm also a CNCF ambassador. Who does not know what CNCF is in the room? Cool, thank you. I am also from Detroit. I chose to move to Detroit, no less. I actually did my first DevOps Days talk in Detroit. And my wife's family's from there, and we moved up there a couple years after my kid was born. So like, don't knock Detroit. These are all pictures I've taken in the last 6 months in downtown Detroit. So I have more if you want to see them. I can talk about Detroit all day long. I will happily be its ambassador to you here in San Francisco today. On to the DevOps part of the talk. Oh, if you're ever in town, let me know. So, I love DevOps. Why? Because we embrace failure. Failure is awesome. It teaches us things we would never know about ourselves. Many people don't understand that failure is this great gift. So when we talk about DevOps and people are like, well, it's all roses and rainbows and unicorns. It's really simple stuff, right? Like, we'll all get along. It'll be great. Sometimes it's nice to remind ourselves that DevOps has a dark side. What is that dark side? Well, it's called failure. Complete abject failure, though, right? I'm talking like failed DevOps transitions, where the digital transformation wrecked. It just went off the rails, and God only knows what happened afterwards. So, organizations try to adopt the 3 ways, and they fail. I've gone through this twice in my own career. I've changed jobs a lot. It's okay. It happens. Failures are part of life. Sometimes we have to learn over and over again what a bad company looks like. So let's explore 2 journeys. But first, a quick disclaimer. This talk was adapted from an article I wrote back in 2017. These are real-world experiences, talking about real things that happened. Hopefully none of you were there, but if you were, someone in the room might be interviewing there. So just keep things quiet. Also, there's motion, so epileptics, beware. No sound, no flashing light, but there is GIFs. So if you can deal with Slack, you can probably deal with this talk. All right, so when I say abject failure, this is what I'm talking about. How disappointed were you in this asshole? Y'all didn't see the movie? Damn. I mean, he's a gangster, don't get me wrong, a cool cryptographer, but really? Ugh. So, a little backstory. Devs teams were adopting DevOps practices, which is great, right? We like that in DevOps transformations. It was for the flagship product, even better, right? Lean, Agile, at least Kanban, small pieces of work were being worked on. It was pretty much going good for that product team. However, IT was actively resisting the transition towards a normal DevOps workflow. Even ticketing, they were like, no, we want Remedy still. This was 2015, mind you. So basically it was no one wanted to do DevOps, but they wanted all the fancy outcomes, right? The typical, I want all the free stuff, please. So there was a major mutiny. All but 2 of the IT ops team left the company, all in one day. One Friday afternoon, they went out to lunch and never came back. It's holy smokes. Okay, cool. Did not know that going in. I knew that a lot of people had left recently because of an acquisition. That's it. Didn't realize it was a full-blown, I'm out. So the tribal knowledge was left with those 2 remaining team members because, well, nothing was documented, of course, right? So typical operation before DevOps shows up. And there were 2 remainers, right? I'll call them, and they were basically fucking up the country. I mean, Brexit. I mean, IT ops. So they were gatekeeping, right? And I loathe gatekeepers. So this is an actual picture of me. That is not an actual lightsaber. but this was taken back in 2002, hence the graininess. I'm a disabled veteran. We can talk about that later. Don't thank me, though. I will call you out on it. This, like younger Chris Short is kind of the representation of, oh yeah, I'm going to come in here and fix this up. I'll be your operations lead. I would have used Ewan McGregor, but episode 1. So week 1 was a sign of how things were going to go. 0 formal processes for onboarding. I changed desks halfway through my second day. I'm a lead. I'm changing desks halfway through the second day. Like, I gave them, a 4 weeks notice to my previous company because that was their policy. So they knew for a month I was coming and couldn't figure out which desk to put me at. Okay, fair. I had a loaner laptop the whole time I worked there. The entire time. It was a loaner laptop. I spent my first week working on compliance training that I didn't need to take because I wasn't in finance. They didn't tell me that. But I also didn't have access to the training. So when I went to the IT people and was like, hey, I need access to this stuff, they didn't come back and say, oh, yeah, by the way, why do you need access to that stuff? They're just like, oh, well, here you go. And so when I turned it all in to like the head training person in the organization, they were like, this is great, but like you don't need any of this. Okay, cool. Appreciate that. That was week 1. All right. So the company did get acquired for $1 billion by a really large tech company. Obviously, if they had $1 billion to acquire them. So that company was coming in to do an architecture review. So this was my first introduction. This was like week 2. This was also my first introduction to the infrastructure as well because I had spent all this time doing compliance training. So keep in mind, the review wasn't for me. It was for the company that bought them. During the review, which was like a 3-day process, I learned the office server room, a server room in a regular office park, just like any floor in any skyscraper here in San Francisco, had a faulty HVAC system. And when I say faulty, I mean it literally leaked water into the server room. And it had been like that for years. No one thought to like actually call BS on the maintenance team and be like, no, fix this permanently. Then I learned that same server room had production workloads in it somehow. I don't know how, but when you have 15-year-old infrastructure, I guess that can happen sometimes. And everyone was totally okay with that until the HVAC broke on my 3rd week. That was fun too. Then kind of like the weirdest, most disappointing part of the discovery during the architecture review happened. There's a Windows NT4 box still present on an ESXi system. Keep in mind, to run NT4 on ESXi, you had to do a whole lot to get to that. NT was released in 1993. It was end of life in 2004. This was 2015. Does anyone know what Windows NT is in the room? Show of hands. No offense to anybody in the room, right? Like, I was working with a younger engineer the other day, and he was like, oh, so what are you speaking on, when you're going to San Fran? I'm like, oh, dark side of DevOps, blah, blah, blah. And I mentioned Windows NT, and he's like, what's that? Fuck, I'm old. It's an operating system, right? Like, it was a predecessor to Windows Server 2000. Just throwing that out there. Yeah, like, who in here has actually, like, administered Windows NT systems? Okay, cool. That's fine, you're bald. We can tell. I have gray hair if you can't tell, so it's fine. All right, so I was like, okay, cool, Windows NT4, right? Like, there's got to be something worse, right? Like, there has to be something worse out here. I'm going to go find it. And it was probably going to be sitting in like a network device is what I was thinking. So let me open my favorite tool, Nmap, which I think is a wonderful network discovery tool. It is not a penetration testing tool at all. However, nmap.org was flagged. So I went to a mirror and downloaded it. And then when I started running the port scan, I was immediately told to stop by the person sitting behind me. Okay, why? We're concerned about the load you're putting on the network. I'm on the Wi-Fi on like a loaner laptop in the office. I'm scanning like port 80 in the data center scanning port 443 in the data. Like I'm not doing like this wide scan. I'm doing like one port at a time and like saving it to a file. Done, 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 and just seeing what's out there. Yeah, too much load. All right, that's cool. You got some metrics to show me? No. Okay, that's fine. So obviously the mutiny was like ongoing, right? Like people were resisting everything I was trying to do. But there was like this glimmer of hope. There's an ambitious plan underway to move the flagship project. Like I mentioned, they were switching to DevOps. They're actually going to containerize it and put it on soft layer. Why soft layer, I don't know, but soft layer. Majority of that work was actually being handled by like a third-party integrator. So the plan was for that vendor to like make it all work, stand up the new infrastructure. Here's a bunch of documentation. Here's like a couple weeks of training, a week of handoff, and then the team would take over operations. Well, as you can imagine, that wasn't going well. The company was relying more and more on the vendor for literally all IT operations, not just the flagship product like migration to containerization in the cloud. So it was becoming very clear that like the team was going to continue their resistance no matter what, and I had no allies on the IT ops team whatsoever. It's like, cool, I'm the outsider and that's fine. So this went on for 3 weeks. And so shortly before a major US holiday towards the end of the year, I determined enough was enough. And after 3 weeks, I put in my 2 weeks notice. You might ask, why the hell would they let you do that? It's because I had taken on so much in that much time, I had to hand off that much stuff. The anti-DevOps mutiny was essentially successful, right? Like they won, because I was just like, I don't have the patience for this bullshit. I don't even list this job on my resume. It's like an embarrassment, right? Like 5 weeks, like who would do that? I'll talk about it though, because it's awesome DevOps experience. But, you know, it's hard to explain to an employer or a recruiter that's like, what's this? Anyways, so let's throw another log on this dumpster fire, right? The leadership tried very hard to get me to stay. Oh, we'll throw more money at you. You just hired me. Why not give me that money to begin with? They offered to terminate people on the spot. Tell us who to fire and we will do it right now. I'm talking a week before a major US holiday. Like a family gathering, it's Christmas. Oh, I'll just say it, it's Christmas. Jeez. So it's like, I was not okay at all with morally bankrupting myself in the name of DevOps, right? Like that's not okay, not one bit. So I said no. Also, I'm not okay with Han Solo being dead. Not okay. It's my favorite character. All right, who wants to talk about better things? Let's talk about a dev rebellion. Yeah, that guy in the back does, sure he does. So I left that opportunity and immediately jumped into another one that was kind of like the inverse. So it was a full-blown DevOps like transition, but the devs were rebelling against the IT ops organization and winning. So stereotypical IT can't get out of their own way. They used ITIL as a rule book, not as a guidebook. Services and infrastructure were all treated the same. Right, like if you needed a new web server, it had to go through the same process as a new network switch. There's vast differences in what those things do, but the processes were the same. Multiple handoffs no matter what, right? Like you literally had to carry paperwork to places. APIs were nowhere to be found. Nowhere, like it was a desert. So full-blown DevOps was happening against the monolithic IT org, right? It was an awesome experience, because it was planned, coordinated, and then executed flawlessly. I didn't do most of the work. I was just there kind of in the background, making things happen where I could and explaining why APIs and, you know, get us something that we can do more, you know, flexibility with. Like their VPN made it so you couldn't even use Docker, like on your laptop. You couldn't run a VM with Docker in it. Like, that's hard. That's hard to break the network stack that bad. So, I had some high hopes though, because it was being planned. So the CTO came in and said, no cloud. There's no cloud city in your future. There'll be no Lando Calrissian for you. Everything had to stay in-house. But like SaaS usage was prevalent everywhere, right? Like they were using GoToMeeting, they were using, you know, all these different services. Office 365 was in the mix for, you know, some teams, and it was rolling out for email to everybody. So it was a real head scratcher for me. But come to find out, CTO might have been trying to justify some very expensive data center decisions in the past couple of years. So he was like, okay, let's propose some chargebacks then. If you're saying cost is the number one concern, let's propose some chargebacks. Didn't even look at the AWS pricing calculator. Like the original draft was 4x what AWS would cost for like a server for anything, like block storage, anything was at least 4x the cost. And well, if you're gonna bill us for this, no, we're not gonna use it. Just no. They couldn't, what was the IT people gonna do? We're not gonna allow you to transfer the money because you're charging us too much, here's your competition. So there was a breaking point, but it was kind of forced. So the team I was working on is a research team. Was inside the health system of a major university. So as you can imagine, that health IT org was very rigid. Again, ITIL is a rule book, not a guidebook. But the team was already using containers. They had figured out a way around the VPN issues with Docker. They were using Papertrail to dump logs as opposed to Splunk, which is what the IT org was using. Why? Because it gave them a better interface. Because they didn't have to put in a ticket to create a new filter. They could just do it themselves. They were using Postgres instead of Oracle. Had a huge Oracle DBA presence, which, as you know, is a presence. And they were using Slack for communication instead of, nothing, because there was no IM product in the IT org. So yeah, super, super advanced org. But the team was completely resisting it. Nevermind Cloud was prohibited. They were gonna push some workloads to Heroku. They didn't care. They were gonna figure out a way to do it. All they did was be honest. They filled out all the appropriate paperwork, as instructed, as desired, IP addresses, the whole 9 yards, CNAMEs, all of them went through no fine. No problems whatsoever. Nobody cared that the IP address wasn't on the network. Nobody cared that the domain name wasn't even in the registry for us. No one cared. It's The assumption from the IT staff was that nobody would nobody would actively resist us, right? Why should we check this stuff? So gangster. All the documentation, clearly stated Heroku. It was crafty, it was very gangster, and it was very, very nifty because they implemented it and it was a huge success. All the research teams loved the service. It was open source, so they could all contribute the code back. And guess what? All those workloads, the anonymized data was getting processed in Heroku, and then all the data was getting fed back to the systems in-house. So it was all stored, provenance, everything else was being handled. You can design your way around crappy IT operations. If you do it like this, though, you're really going to piss some people off. Just remember that. They all signed off on utilizing cloud resources while they were saying they never would. It's a full-blown shadow IT project with an approval, right? Authorized to operate, here you go. Shadow IT. They signed off on it. We could do it. It was right there. Right there. Their documentation, ITSM, everything, all of it was right there. You approved it. Cat's out of the bag. The org then started saying, okay, we would like to use Azure for this. We would like to use AWS for that. So they kind of threw their hands up. They attempted to change to satisfy the team's needs, right? They were using ServiceNow, which no knock on ServiceNow, right? If you use ServiceNow right, it's good. It can do what you need it to do, but they literally turned on everything. Just not the API for some reason. So I couldn't automatically update a ticket when a service came online, or file that, hey, I'm aware of it, our monitoring already alerted me when a ticket was opened. Couldn't do that. One of the people that I worked with in the health system actually deployed OpenStack at NASA. To deploy OpenStack at this health system was going to take 18 months. Dude, you did this at NASA. Come on, man. That can't be that hard, really? So they said, fine. You want APIs? We'll give you APIs. A couple weeks later, they bring in this, startup that just got acquired by Cisco, this API framework company. It's this will solve all of our problems. Won't it? Right? Right? We already bought it, right? It'll solve all your problems, right? You mean you didn't ask us if this thing was going to solve our problems before you just bought it? Like, well, it was, it was too good to pass up. What? So if you want to stop a shadow IT operation inside your own organization, right, like consult with them when you give them a solution to their problem. Step one. Do that first. So the team was working around the bottlenecks. Like, I was implementing automation. I was doing all kinds of fun things with Docker, with the development team, the actual Ruby developers, right? Like, teaching a Ruby developer how to use Docker in like a really like cloud native way is awesome. Especially when they're like, yeah, I've been writing Ruby for a really long time. I've never heard of like containers. But one morning I walked in and all of a sudden they had changed, what was it? Not etsy-skel. What's the file on Linux systems that like controls root access? sudoers. They completely changed that file so that not only could I not sudo anymore, I had to sudo to a different username, then I would have access. It's like, I'm not sure what that accomplished, but whatever. And also, they completely broke all the automation in the process because, well, the automation was Ansible, my favorite tool. Also, I work for Red Hat, by the way. So, like, all this cool stuff that we were doing just automatically broke overnight because they pushed out this change completely uncommunicated, although they followed all their communication processes, of course. You know, why communicate to the research team that's, 5 feet below you? It happens. Not really. So, like, a cloud-native future was seeming next to impossible. The resistance and educating the IT organization were critical. I was kind of trying to push this with the team of developers that was already kind of overtaxed already, trying to work around this. The alternative was to join with the IT organization's thinking, which was kind of like, okay, fine, we'll take 18 months to deploy OpenStack so I can just spin up a EC2 instance that costs $10 a month. I'm not sure I can grok that one, but okay. So the problem was really kind of like the top of the IT org chart was realizing change had to happen, but the bottom was reinforcing the ITIL like stodgy ways. Not that there's anything wrong with ITIL, it's just it's not designed to be implemented as gospel, right? Like it's not used that way, and if you're using it that way, you should probably go back and take whatever training you got again, or get a refund. So the rebellion was in full force. It was kind of working. Microservices were being built, deployed. We were using Heroku. We were using Slack. They complained about that, and we said, well, what do you got? They're like, oh, WebEx. And we're like, not the same. Not even close. So yeah, the IT org had no way of like keeping up with multiple releases a day. So they were starting to push back on that too. It's like, well, what do you mean you need multiple load balancer changes a day? It's like, it's just one record. It's just one dip. Change occurred when the IT organization finally realized it was lagging way behind, right? Like, that's great. But they couldn't compete on cost, obviously. They eventually made compliant, Azure resources available, HIPAA compliant, all that fun stuff. And then last I heard, it was still taking them a while to get a VM, like 3 to 4 weeks, as opposed to 2 to 3 months. So that's kind of an improvement. Cloud resources did become available, but it was kind of like a inevitable like future that they were just resisting at that point. So it was like I was back in the same situation where the IT ops was resisting change, even though they knew it had to happen, kind of thing. So, well, time to move on to new things. I was there for like 6 or 7, or 3 months maybe. So what I learned from these experiences, well, moving jobs in Raleigh is really easy. But no, like, failure is awesome. Like I said, it's our greatest teacher. We've learned as a species so much through failure. We've gone to the moon. We're going to go to Mars, which means we have to go to the moon again to figure out how to get to Mars, right? Like, that's crazy, right? Like, we didn't learn enough the first time. Technology's changed so much, and now we have to relearn it. Okay, that's a failure, right? Like, how did we not continue that evolution? Chaos engineering is now a thing, right? Like, we build failure into our systems. Why? To make them more resilient. Why? Because breaking things makes them stronger eventually, right? Like, if you heal them. Figuring out ways to fail harder is a job now. I think that's really cool. So, oh, sorry, wrong way. I've learned that DevOps needs allies at all levels, right? Not just the bottom, not just the top, both directions. So find somebody in the middle to help you figure that piece out if you're trying to make a transition. I wish I've learned this earlier in my career, obviously. But, you know, sometimes you have to figure it out the hard way. I think the biggest thing, though, is people have to want to improve the things around them, right? Like, I've run into some people that are like, literally, why change? I have to retire in 2 years. Why would I learn anything new? Like, that's fine. Go sit over here in the corner. You know? Here's your new job. It's our monitoring system. Anyway, so the Dev Rebellion had people at all levels like pointing at successes. The Ops Mutiny had a small, powerful group resisting changes regardless of outcomes. So notice that, right? Like pointing at successes as opposed to saying this won't work no matter what. Waiting for something to, like trying something is better than not trying something. Both were personal failures in my opinion, because I left both jobs pretty early. That's fine. Why though? Like, I wasn't able to rally enough support in time to keep me from going mad. So I learned that I have very little patience and a low tolerance for ignorant people, I guess. Like, probably should have learned that from the military, maybe. Yeah. So what happened? Well, I blacked out the company name. IBM acquired the Ops Mutiny for $1 billion. 3 years later, there were massive layoffs, and I believe there was a significant write-down in the investment too. So, yeah, that didn't go well for the Ops Mutiny. So they probably lost their jobs because they didn't adapt, period. I might have amazing forethought. Might have learned that along the way, or I could just be lucky, who knows. One thing I do know is a dumpster fire will eventually burn itself out. So, DevOps is a combination of people, processes, and tools. People implement processes using tools. If you want to succeed, you should invest in people first. They can then work your processes towards your goals. They can improve your processes. They can exceed your goals. But you have to put the right tools in their hands and enable them to do more with them. If you don't invest in them properly, well, something will come for you eventually. But you can correct the course now. It doesn't take much to sit down and ask your people, what can we do better now? DevOps is continuous improvement, right? So start somewhere. What can we do better today? Eliminate some toil. Can we improve some documentation? Can we stop a page from going off once a week somehow? Small wins lead to bigger wins. Gains, gains, gains. I'm not a weightlifter, but yeah, in case you are. So humans are hard. Focus more time here. There's 2 great quotes from 2 friends of mine. Tech is easy, meat is hard. That's my favorite one. It's from Nirmal Mehta. He's the chief technologist at Booz Allen Hamilton. And we all know Bridget Gromhout. She said computers are easy, people are hard. So those 2 really, really smart people, smarter than me, saying people are hard. Work on that, if you don't believe me. So, I'm finishing early because I am the last talk, but it's like 5 minutes early, it's no big deal. I cannot state how thankful I am that y'all are here, right? Like, you could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with me. Thank you, Jay-Z. If you want to follow me online, I have a newsletter and a blog. And I also work at Red Hat. You can follow my stuff at Ansible.com as well.